Two substantive briefings today, members. Stephen Agnew, MLA, on his private member's bill, which is on children's services cooperation. And then we have a departmental briefing. This is from officials on the mid-year review of the Executive's European Union priorities for 2013-14. The Forward Work Programme included two other departmental briefings scheduled for today. One was on the draft spring supplementary estimates and final budget. The Executive, though, has not yet agreed the budget timeline. The other was on the review of the gender equality strategy. And in relation to that strategy, we received a paper at 3:09 p.m. yesterday. And when the clerk alerted me to that and the fact that officials would be available to come to us on the 12th of February, I decided it would be better to postpone rather than to accept a late paper yet again. So I hope members are content with that decision.
Content, yeah.
We have apologies, members, from Brenda Hale and from Jimmy Spratt. Leslie Cree, I think, is hoping to join us, but there's a clash with a member or a commission, thank you, meeting of the commission, and Megan is hoping to join us. So I don't think there are any other. Oh, Chris Little, presumably will. And we haven't had an apology from
Chair, can I just, in relation to Jimmy and Brenda, can I clarify they are on assembly business? That's why.
Sorry, yes, they are. Sorry, yes. Yep. They made clear last week they are on a regional development committee. Yeah. Trip, I think. So, yeah, thanks. Thank you, Stephen. Members, in the agreed timelines for interaction between departments and committees, it is an agreed principle that departments should consult with committees about any review of existing policies, and also should consult us in terms of development of any new policies at as early a stage as possible in the process, and well before publication of consultation documents. Now, last week we had an issue about not being consulted in advance of the initiation of a consultation on delivering social change for children and young people. And that draft strategy, as we know, is now out. Since last week, it was brought to my attention that the Department has launched a consultation on good relations indicators, which will be used in relation to together building a united community and that strategy. And again, the committee was not informed, nor were we supplied with the consultation documents. So that's within hours of last week's meeting, where I think we're all in agreement. We were unhappy with the lack of consultation and indeed potentially respect shown to the committee over the children and young people's consultation. What I would propose to do is to write to the Permanent Secretary of the Department and ask him to come to committee to discuss.
Is that head of the civil service, you mean?
Yes. Dr. McKibben, who would be the accounting officer and Perm Sec for OFMDFM.
Well, I think you should write and say that we want to see him forthwith, because otherwise that'll go into Never Never Land as well, and that's not a comment upon him. I want to be clear. It's a comment upon that.
No, we've tried a number of strategies to try and improve relations, and this is one we haven't tried, so that's why I think it's worth proposing. So if there are no objections, we will give it a go, and it would be as soon as possible.
This pattern of behaviour, which seems to predate my attendance, but certainly since my joining, seems to be a pattern that is getting no better and arguably worse.
You can take no credit for it, Alex.
No, I'm not saying. I'm just commenting that seems to be my experience of it.
It does predate you.
Yes, I know. But you know, is there not something that we should be doing within the assembly structures to put it on record that this is the way the committee is being, in my view, impeded, but certainly not being helped to fulfil its statutory function, because that's what's happening. We are not being able to fulfil our statutory function given to us under law and required in terms of devolution.
Well, I think, as I say, we've tried a number of strategies in terms of direct liaison at various levels with the department. The next logical step to me is the chairperson's liaison group, and it has been discussed there. And I don't think the issues are necessarily unique to this department, but they do seem to be pronounced. And again, I would make a distinction between political issues, where I think we have to recognise that this is the only department where there is a joint ministry, and that could give rise to particular issues. But on something like informing the committee of a consultation in a timely manner, you cannot possibly, to my mind, argue that there is a political issue to that. The consultation document we discussed on the children's strategy last week, or indeed the indicators for TBUC, which are in your table papers today, there is nothing of that kind of political nature that would justify saying we weren't able to come to the committee in a timely manner.
Yeah, Chairman, I think that, as you say, we have discussed this on a number of occasions, and clearly there are political issues which is not to be unexpected, and some of them have been actually addressed. So there are political issues, and we all know about that. But there are things there which I do think it's hard to understand how, as you say, some of the issues you refer to yourself, you don't get earlier notice or proper notice. It's not unique because it happens across virtually all of the departments, and that's why the chairperson liaison group actually dealt with this and did agree and tabled the report in the Assembly and debated it in the Assembly for the need to have liaison between the executive and the committee structured in here to resolve all those timely matters. I've seen statements issued by ministers without any record to go near committees and stuff like that, so it happens across the board. It's happened in recent days, actually, where statements have been issued by ministers in a recent week or two. So it's not unique, but that doesn't make it any more acceptable. So I think you should do what I think they've already agreed to do. And I think we should refer to the committee, the chairperson liaison group report, to see what actually action has happened as a result of that report being tabled.
Okay.
So it does deal specifically with that issue, Chairman, as you know.
Okay. But you're content that we ask Malcolm McKibben to come and speak to us as urgently as possible? Okay. Thank you. Members, at page 5 of your pack, we have a request from the Chair of the Community Relations Council, who would like to come and brief us. What I would suggest is the latest peace monitoring report is due out mid-March, so any time thereafter might be appropriate if you're agreeable. Also, page 8, the committee's current invitations. We move on then to draft minutes from page 8 of your electronic packs, minutes of the 22nd of January. Are we content to agree?
Great.
Thank you. Matters arising, beginning at page 14, responses from the department to our request for details of the Executive's advertising programme for 2013-14, and also information on the research undertaken by the Strategic Investment Board on the childcare strategy. In May, members, you may recall, we got details of the work the SIB had carried out to identify models for the provision of childcare, including the full cost model. And this informed the development of Bright Start. We have discovered that our request for details of the SIB research has been declined on the basis that it's policy and development. But they have given the summary of childcare demand and supply completed by the SIB, and that is on page 16 of your electronic packs. With regard to the advertising programme, we're told that the department made bids for advertising, including NI Direct and the Equality Commission, but not in terms of childcare provision. There's no indication that the department will be bidding for a campaign for childcare provision in the 2014-15 programme, but then again, there's no indication that they won't. question then would be whether we would feel moved to encourage the department to make a bid in the 2014-15 advertising campaign budget, specifically for advertising the availability of childcare support and provision. And if you remember, we have had evidence from users and providers that there is a lack of awareness of provision.
I think, you know, it was around the fact that there is help out there through tax credits that people are not picking up on, as opposed to the lack of, you know, as opposed to the provision of childcare. So it's around what's already available, and I know some MLAs in their own constituencies, you know, have put that into the papers. But I wouldn't have a difficulty in terms of agreeing with your proposal.
If the members agree, I don't see the harm in us saying we would like you to bear that in mind in the bids, and obviously the full wash is up to the executive and the committee who'll decide on advertising, but we can see the validity of putting the childcare provision in there. Yeah? Okay, thank you. Next, members, on page 47, correspondence from the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission. First of all, commenting on the Executive's compliance with the international human rights monitoring systems. They also highlight a number of key engagements which are required during 2014. I would suggest we write to the Commission just acknowledging that and ask they keep us updated on developments in relation to these key engagements.
Brilliant.
At 49 then, further correspondence from the Human Rights Commission. If you remember, we took a briefing 15th of January relating specifically to historical and institutional abuse. It includes the observations of the UN Committee Against Torture and the Committee for the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, and also the Commission's comments on the inquiry into historical institutional abuse. And finally, in this regard, the Commission's strategic plan 2013-16 and the business plan for 13-14 are on page 69. Members content to note? Then to page 93 of your pack, correspondence from a member of the public. This is in relation to the lack of response from the department following a meeting held in June with the junior ministers on clerical abuse and abuse in the Magdalene laundries. Are you content that we forward to the department for comment?
Yeah.
Thank you. Page 95, and correspondence from the Minister for Justice to advise us the Executive agreed the position of the Northern Ireland Judicial Appointments Ombudsman should be held by NIPSO, and requesting that we include this in our bill. We had previously agreed that we should do so, and the drafter has been advised accordingly. So are you content we just write formally to the Minister for Justice to advise him that this is in play?
Great.
Thank you. And page 97 is the famous list of outstanding issues. And just one of members, should we just leave these things like 30th of November 2012 Common Funding Scheme implications from OFMDFM? Maybe have a think. Maybe we could have a very brief discussion on this next week, and, whether we should tidy it up or whether we should continue to wait for the glorious day when somebody actually responds. Page 95. Oh, sorry, beg your pardon. That's right. It's item 5, members, was correspondence, and what I would propose to do, I'll just pause very briefly for comment, and otherwise I'll take silence as the fact you're content to note, if that's okay. Page 101 is a memo for the Committee for Culture, Arts and Leisure, advising us it's opened an inquiry into inclusion in the arts of working class communities, and the committee is seeking comments from other committees by the 14th of March. Page 103, a memo from the Committee for Employment and Learning. It's opened an inquiry into post-school special educational need provision in education, employment and training for those with learning disabilities. The committee is seeking comments by 21st of March. Page 111, copy correspondence from the Committee for Finance and Personnel in relation to monitoring of departmental savings plans. We're advised OFMDFM are expected to meet their targets for 2013-14. Page 117, correspondence from the Committee for Education to our department in relation to primary school level integrating enriching education project. And at page 3 of your table pack, members, is a copy of the department's consultation on the good relations indicators, the indicators I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting. It was published on the 22nd of January. We were advised on the 27th of January. I don't know if members have had a chance to take a look, but I think on page 5 you'll see methodology. And there's these agreed criteria, outcome focused rather than process focused, which seems very reasonable. There's another one, available. That is published regularly. Not quite sure I understand what that means, so it would have been useful to have had a chat beforehand. It also makes clear a workshop was held in terms of the methodology for agreeing these indicators. A workshop was held on the 27th of September 2013 with the advisory group to further discuss this draft list of indicators. Following the workshop, OFMDFM had further follow-up meetings with policy colleagues. I thought we were policy colleagues, but obviously not. And conversations with key departmental colleagues to finalise the draft interim set of indicators. There we are. So, can I take it we would like to have a briefing from the department on the indicators and how they got to arrive at this position? Sorry, members. Also, page 17 of the table pack is a draft motion in relation to the committee's report on our event, Delivering Social Change Signature Programmes, if you remember that event we had upstairs. The committee agreed to bring forward a motion on the event. Are you happy with what we have on page 17 of the table papers? Which, for the record, is that this Assembly notes the report of the Committee of the Office of the First Minister and Deputy First Minister on its event on the Delivering Social Change Signature Programmes, and calls on the First Minister and Deputy First Minister to ensure that meaningful and comprehensive engagement with practitioners and stakeholders is central to the development of any future signature programmes.
Yep.
Thank you. Right. So we're on to 6. So, members, the next item is our first substantive briefing. It comes from Stephen Agnew, MLA, who's bringing forward a private member's bill in relation to children's service cooperation. On page 120 of your electronic pack is the clerk's brief. Then at page 121, you'll find a copy of the draft bill. At page 127 is a copy of the briefing paper. And at page 131 is a copy of a research paper which accompanies the bill. It will be introduced shortly in this committee. We'll have responsibility for the committee stage. And Stephen Agnew, you're very welcome.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you. Thank you for having us here today.
Okay. I'll invite you to introduce your colleague and make some opening remarks.
Sure. This is Ross Brown. He's my parliamentary researcher and has been working extensively on this bill. I've presented to the committee before, so hopefully you'll have some awareness. I'll try not to repeat too much. The genesis of this bill for me was through my work on the All-Party Group for Children and Young People, who've been, the children's sector have been campaigning for a statutory duty to cooperate for a number of years. The importance of it was highlighted to me with the what was the eventual failure of the draft early years strategy, which was presented to the All-Party Group for Children and Young People by the Department of Education. And when I asked the question what work has been done with the Department of Health, I was told it was a Department of Education strategy. Given early years, very much a key issue in the area of working with children, not the 6 years, all the research shows this is a key age in the development of our young people. We essentially had a draft early years strategy, not the 6, which started at age 3. because the Department of Education, by and large, won't come into contact with children before then. So that's highlighted to me a deficiency in government that I think most people will agree to some extent. People disagree to what extent, which is a lack of joined up cooperation between government departments. And I know there has been a lot of work at OFMDFM through the Children's Champion, through the Ministerial Subgroup on Children and Young People, and now through delivering social change to try to right that problem, the perceived silo mentality. And there are certainly good practice examples of where departments are working well together. What I have said is I want to make good practice common practice with the introduction of this bill, and make it a standard of how departments operate, rather than good practice that happens in isolated examples where maybe certain individuals have driven it forward. I've been meeting with a number of permanent secretaries recently, as well as the parties and those in the sector. As one permanent secretary put it, this legislation would concentrate the minds. And I think that's ultimately what it's about. And I think when I was in front of this committee before, your predecessor in the committee said, well, this has been a problem that's been around for years. What makes you think you can change it? And I think it is about concentrating the minds and saying now is the time to start changing it. And whilst this bill in itself will not do it if passed, it really is. And as we asked in a consequent consultation, will it make it more likely? And I very much believe that cooperation will be more likely if it's required, and I think it is. I think the requirement is important rather than desired. I think if it's required, I think it will happen. Very briefly, then, to explain the bill. The bill for me breaks down into three key elements. There's the high-level duty on government departments to collaborate with each other in the achievement of the 6 high-level outcomes, which mirror the 6 high-level outcomes in the bill, mirror those in the 10-year strategy for children and young people. And that's really to set it at that policy level, that the likes of the draft early years strategy, whenever a strategy like that's been devised, we don't have the situation whereby a single department which is producing a strategy which will impact across wider society beyond the remit of their department operates on its own. The second duty is about the delivery of children's services. The planning, commission and delivery operating at agency level. And currently within the Department of Health we have the Children and Young People Strategic Partnership, which has been seen as a success in bringing agencies together. The weakness that still currently exists is whilst it is required to go out to other agencies and seek collaboration, there's no requirement on those agencies to come back and agree to that collaboration, and it really is setting a standard across the board, saying that, again, this is a core duty. The final element is the enabling legislation to allow pool budgets. Now, I'll be very honest with this committee in saying that we have had mixed feedback on whether or not we need enabling legislation to allow for pool budgets. We've literally had written questions asked to 2 departments asking, are you collaborating with the other department? And one says yes and the other says no. I think that's a lot to do with definition of collaboration, etc. But it's unclear about whether or not there can be pooling of budgets and resources legislatively. So the enabling legislation is there. Certainly if this committee was looking at it and it was deemed wasn't needed, it could come out, of course, come at a further stage. But we very much feel that the pooling of budgets is a necessary outworking of the statutory duty to cooperate. The example I always give, is why would the Department of Health invest in early years so that we have less crime among teenagers? Apart from the fact it's the right thing to do, but less crime among teenagers it's not the remit of the Department of Health. It is the remit of the Department of Justice. So they might recognise the Department of Health as the vehicle to deliver some of the early years services, but they might be willing to achieve their aims to put up some of their funds pool funds with the Department of Health to deliver programmes which will see benefits in their own department. So that's where and how I see it working. And, you know, in the discussions we've had, I mean, this is a change in how things would be done to some extent. But we've had some quite positive feedback from a number of senior civil servants. Say it's where the term concentrate the minds from. You know, there are those already there who are trying to move things in that direction of cooperation, and they see this legislation as something that will help enable that.
Okay, thank you very much, Stephen. I suppose we're in the well rehearsed area of government. Traditionally has tended to work in silos and vertically, and what you're talking about is identifying the need to go horizontally across. So could we begin with the idea of best practice in terms of governmental provision for children? Where in the world would you have identified countries that do it the best?
Well, I mean, I think I'll let Ross come in on this. We would have done more of the international research. I mean, Scotland are a very good example, and they've got themed departments, but they are also looking at statutory duty as, in fact, as part of their children and young people bill that's going through Parliament at the moment. England have introduced the statutory duty. It's somewhat different to what's proposed here, because theirs is largely focused on local authorities, which have very different powers. So the structures have required us to look at a different model. But again, there's a lot of positivity around the impact that's had, to the extent, whilst there's still, I think, resistance to it from those who almost want to maintain that silo mentality. An attempt to overturn the bill was defeated in the House of Lords. So when the English introduced it and where it's been challenged, it's been successfully defended. I don't know, Ross, if you want to come in with other examples of good practice.
Just before you do, Stephen, I want to be clear that I heard you correctly, because the first example you gave of good practice internationally was Scotland, but you're saying in Scotland they do not have a statutory duty as yet.
They have themed departments, which again I think is a good example of how things could be done. Not what I'm proposing. They don't have the statutory duty as of yet, but it's currently gone through the Scottish Parliament.
Ross,
I think the way to measure, you know, the best practice is probably to look at the outcomes essentially. And in terms of the two countries that have have been measured by the United Nations, UNICEF, the two countries that come out on top are Sweden and the Netherlands. I think they're joint top. In terms of their governance arrangements, it's difficult because they've so many different structures of government altogether in some of these places. So it is difficult for me to give you specific examples of how this legislation ties in with the Netherlands and Sweden, but it's definitely something I could try and find out in that respect and follow up on. The other thing that I would add is that in terms of the amount of money that is spent on children and young people at those early intervention, those early years, is significantly higher in those two countries as well. So it does also translate into different levels of outcomes. So it's something that I can certainly look into more and provide the committee with that information.
okay, I'm not trying to trip you up here. I'm just interested now that, I mean, my mind took me straight to where in the world is the best practice, and therefore why is there best practice? Is it because of this kind of statutory duty to cooperate? You immediately identify Sweden and Netherlands as two countries where there is best practice, but you don't know whether there is a statutory duty to cooperate. Is that,
I think that,
is that not strange that we're on different planes here?
as I say, there's different structures of government out there in terms of how they're in terms of.
Okay, so how does Sweden do it?
Well, I'd need to get back to you on that one. As I say, I would need to get back to you on that one.
I mean, I think it's clear that this bill in and of itself will not give us the Swedish or the Dutch model. We have to start from where we are, and it's true they do invest significantly more in preventative strategies, including early years funding. But I accept the point. We need to look at whether or not they've required statutory duty in their government departments to work together, or what collaboration exists in theirs, and I'm certainly willing to come back to the committee with it.
Okay, but you're now bringing in the issue of funding, and I hope you would accept that's a very different proposition from a statutory duty to cooperate, because if you have limitless funds, it might be a reasonable assumption that you'll do better.
Absolutely, and that's, I mean, that's my point, is I'm not sure if in those examples their outcomes are better because they invest more or because they have better structures. I suspect it's a combination of both, but we can certainly get back to the committee on that.
Stephen Mitry.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to raise the issue about Scotland, but you've covered that. Can I just take you back to the statutory duty to cooperate in England and Wales, which was introduced in 2004? And in your research paper, you had said that, you know, it was early days, but the research paper is nearly 2 years old now. Have you done any more work? You know, is there any more progress 2 years on down the road from the paper that you can see that we can learn from England and Wales?
I can certainly get back to you on that one as well.
I think the difficulty is when in this area. I mean, whilst 2004 is a number of years, we're talking about the life outcomes for children, and it is we're looking at generations. You know, what impact will the statutory duty in England have had with that generation that has come through, that is coming through since? So it's hard to look at the outcomes of not the 6-year-old since the statutory duty, when really outcomes are in terms of long-term health, employment, etc.
Yeah.
And those children won't have reached those milestones in their life. So it's difficult. That's why in our research paper, you know, we acknowledge it's difficult to say it's been a success. I suppose the success that we see in it is those working with children within the children's sector very much have seen it to have progressed things. And we'll all know here, NGOs aren't always champions for what governments do. They're normally there to challenge what's been done, and in that regard, that's where we've heard positive evidence from England that they've seen the statutory duty as something that's progressed things.
If I can just add in, again, the structures under the Conservative government are being changed in England in terms of what the Labour government introduced under the 2004 Act. Right. One of the things that they did try and change was to remove the statutory duty to cooperate, and that was defeated in the House of Lords under recognition that it was actually contributing to positive outcomes. So in terms of the changes that they did try and bring forward, it was recognised in the House of Lords that this was a positive change, and it was something that was making things was making collaboration more likely and was leading to improved outcomes. But in terms of the specific research updates, I mean, there has been a number of other papers that have come out. I mean, for example, you know, the Northern Ireland Children's Commissioner still calling for statutory duty to cooperate, and again, you know, the key, they released a report fairly recently from Brona Byrne and Laura Lundy, and again they emphasised the requirement for a duty to cooperate, so it still is recognised.
I accept that in relation to here, but I'm just interested in England and Wales, where it has been introduced, to see what benefits. But okay, thanks, Chair.
Alex Maskey.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks, Stephen and Ross. I don't think anybody would be in any way unsympathetic to what you're trying to achieve here, because that's something that I think the Chair, you've said yourself that we'd all be very keen to make sure all departments work across one another to deliver the right outcomes. So to that extent, I certainly wish you well on behalf of our party grouping in terms of taking this forward, and that's without prejudice to obviously what formally the party might say, and ultimately, because we'll have to take all this in a round, and that's why gratefully you're here this afternoon also to try and brief us a wee bit. If I understand this correctly, what you're looking for is OFM. I mean, you're determining a set of criteria, which would, you think they said earlier on, there would be the high level outcomes. And whatever about the high level outcomes that you've referred to there, and maybe want to come on that at the end of this a wee bit, just in terms of what they might mean and how can you actually measure some of those things. Like, what if I read this, what this would be designed to do would be to give the OFMDFM the authority then to lay proposals jointly to the House to modify or increase the criteria. Some of which here would be being healthy, living in safety and stability, raising economic and environmental well-being, and so on. So in other words, on the one hand, you would say the OFMDFM should be able to lay draft changes for that, and then the substance really of all of this would be changing the Children's Order 1985, which then specifies a range of departments and organisations which have to work together to cooperate. On top of that, then you have a fund which is pooled from the various organisations and agencies. Would this legislation be given the authority to OFMDFM to create additional criteria, as you've outlined here, some of them, but also determine which organisations have to contribute to this fund? Because I mean, I think you're, well, I don't know, but I'm sure certainly right away you're going to get a lot of organisations saying that's all very well, but where's the funding stream come for that? And you've listed quite a number of organisations in there, from like Probation Board, Justice Agency, Maintain School Sector, so on. So I'm just wondering how do you actually end up dictating? Because in a way that might be necessary, might be a good thing, but I'm just simply saying I'm being half devil's advocate here. So there are a number of powers there, but I'm not so sure how that would actually work in practice.
I suppose just to clarify, the pool budgets is enabling legislation. It would allow departments to pool budgets. It wouldn't require them to. So I mean, I very much believe it's necessary way to make the statutory duty to work, but to some extent I'm not legislating for that, in the sense it's to allow them to do so. So that would be a conversation between the departments. You know, in our conversations we have been given examples where departments are pooling budgets presently, and that's where, you know, as I say, when we ask questions, we'll get some people say it's a pool budget, some people say it won't, and it's really been hard to try and drill down into how a pool budget's defined and whatever. So, but we had an example actually, I think recently, of the Department of Justice and the Department of Education looking at an early intervention fund where they'd collaborate. So it's in that kind of voluntary practice, but obviously the duty to cooperate would make that type of voluntary arrangement more likely. But it's not us saying, it wouldn't give OFMDFM certainly couldn't say you two must work together and you must pool budgets. What OFMDFM has the power to do to say we've to relay a report beyond to the Assembly to show how cooperation is taking place in this area. What are you doing? And if you're not doing something, do it quickly. Because we're accountable to the Assembly.
Are you not saying in subsection 3 there that the office, which is the OFMDFM, may by order specify which bodies for the purposes of this Act do a number of things, including provide staff, goods, services, accommodation or other resources? Establish and maintain a pool fund, so they have the order to do that. It's on page 2.
Sorry, yes. No, I see.
I'm only using that as an example of the type of authority you're looking to give. May
by order specify which bodies. Yes, I mean, I suppose it gives the power to OFMDFM, yes, to outline those guidelines as to which departments could and should pool. As I say, I don't think it's a requirement, but I think that's something in terms of the drafting. We just need to see if that is an unintended consequence. But it certainly was never intended to be a requirement that departments must be able to pool budgets, or must pool budgets.
I think the other thing is obviously it is an order, so it still has to go through the Assembly in terms of the scrutiny, and again you mentioned the high level outcomes. Any changes to them also need to come through the Assembly, so there is a level of scrutiny there in terms of what those regulations are going to be.
No, I appreciate that. I'm just making the point that, you know, you can by order make these specifications. So in other words, it would happen, or they were supposed to happen.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. No, I accept that.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Just looking again at the draft legislation, Stephen, the general duty says that the Northern Ireland departments, quote, must ensure that. And then it goes on to talk about functions and people discharging functions do so in a way that contributes to the achievement of the specified outcomes, and the specified outcomes are the well-being of children and young people, which are then further defined in terms of health, enjoyment and safety and so on. So the key, I think, is the Northern Ireland departments must ensure, whereas in the Welsh legislation it is have due regard, and in Scotland I think it's keep under consideration. So we've got keep under consideration, due regard, and must ensure. What's your analysis of the potential outcome of those three duties and what it practically might mean for children and young people?
I mean, I think in terms of must ensure, our choice of language is about giving strength to the bill. We didn't want to go through this process for having something that is there on paper but could be disregarded. So it is about that. Now, we've been very careful in ensuring that, for example, there are 6 outcomes there that not every policy, for example, will necessarily have a direct impact on this. So we were clear when we were drafting this and speaking to the drafters that we wanted to ensure it was in discharge and function where it impacts upon children. So it's ensuring that each department's work where it impacts upon children contributes to these outcomes. Now, again, this is a near final draft is probably the best I can put it. We ourselves have questioned this so as to contribute to, because we want to ensure it doesn't hamstring departments to the point that you know, something that may seem almost not irrelevant to children. I think most legislation we put forward in the Assembly will impact upon children as part of our society, but that, you know, it's not overly onerous and proven that every little piece of legislation contributes to all 6 of these outcomes, only where the discharge of the department's functions relevant, and indeed that policy implications are relevant.
But even if we take it that OFMDFM, with responsibility for children's issues and health, that clear brief might be the 2, as it were, lead departments. I'm not sure there's any department that wouldn't fall under your proposed general duty.
Yeah.
At paragraph 1. Regional development, for example, you could argue, well, the provision of public transport is contributing positively to community and society and to economic environmental well-being. What happens if a minister comes back and says, you put me under a duty where I must ensure that these things happen, but I don't have the budget to do it?
I think the must ensure is around collaboration. Collaboration in the achievement of these.
No, it says in such a way as to contribute to the achievement of the specific outcomes. So what happens if a minister says, I don't have the budget and I have failed to contribute?
Well, I think I accept the point as well. It does apply to every department. It just won't apply to every department and every function, to clarify that point. In terms of contributing, I accept the point that you may not have the resources to contribute to a large extent, but I think contribute is sufficiently allows to say we've contributed to it. We haven't solved it, we haven't achieved it. It may not even be our main function, but we've contributed to it without necessarily wholly tackling it, but we've played our part across the range of departments.
So you could contribute to it without actually meaning to?
You could do. I don't see that. You know, it's about a direction. Contributing to the 6 outcomes. It's about moving things towards that direction. The degree to which you contribute, I suppose, is not the issue for this piece of legislation.
Have you thought of looking at the current departments and seeing the extent to which they currently, whether they intend to or not, contribute to the achievement of your specified outcomes?
Well, I think I suppose looking at it somewhat conversely, it's part of the genesis of the bill has been the failure, and for example, the failure of the 10-year strategy for children and young people, which I think many people would acknowledge, including within OFMDFM, I think it's fair to say that it was a very strong document, very large document, but actually the progress, the outcomes that were to derive from the document haven't been achieved, and certainly from the sector's point of view, what's been identified as a lack of collaboration as being one of the key reasons why those outcomes aren't being achieved. So, you know, each department, I'm sure, could could go in front of you and say, here's what we've done to contribute to these outcomes, but the insufficient progress has been deemed to be as a result, in part, of a lack of collaboration between the departments.
Well, as your draft bill puts a duty on these departments to contribute to the achievement of specified outcomes, it might be interesting to ask the departments to what extent they currently contribute to being healthy, enjoying learning and achievement, living in safety and with stability, experiencing economic and environmental well-being, contributing positively to community and society, and living in a society which respects their rights. I would imagine every department would give you a fairly detailed list of achievements and contributions.
I think it's probably a fair question.
Alex Abbott.
Thank you very much. I am tempted, Chair, to suggest that given our previous discussion that we should table legislation about a duty to cooperate with this department from OFMDFM. that might move things on a bit, but maybe that's already covered by the Northern Ireland Act. I must go and check. But
I think you find it probably is.
So then there's the breach of the law. Well, a serious matter.
Yeah.
Could I ask? The first thing is I think that this last discussion you had about the what contribute means. My sense is that departments try to avoid making commitments in terms of contributions to what they might do in terms of young people or any other sector of society if they can avoid it, which is not a very healthy comment to make, but I think that it tends to be the nature that people hold back rather than come forward. That's why I think the essence of your bill is a very healthy one. The questions, though, are as follows. The first is, and this may well have been answered in previous sessions with the committee, but did OFMDFM have any conversation with you about them taking ownership of this bill?
No, not at this point. We have met with representatives of OFMDFM or officials from OFMDFM, but we've certainly had engagement, and to some extent we've been advised what they are doing, and to some extent they're not so much their view, because it's been officials, it'd be more the ministers to make that view, but say we have had engagement and very much an outline of what they're doing. How they potentially would see this affecting their work, but no, at no point has it been suggested they would take us on. To some extent as well, I think there was an issue, Ross, correct me if I'm wrong in this, when we spoke with the Bills Office. Bizarrely, whilst you can legislate for this as a private member, an individual department such as OFMDFM can bring forward a piece of legislation that would legislate for other departments. Now, that was advice we got from the Bills Office, and that, I think if I'm remembering that right, Ross, but so there was a suggestion that actually almost it would either have to come as an executive bill or a private member's bill, but an individual department can bring a duty such as this because it legislates for other departments.
Well, it would be not trying to, subject to your advice and not trying to get ahead of your bill or your work. It might be useful to determine whether OFMDFM in their own right or that the executive might take forward this bill if they were inclined to do so, because the weight of a department or the weight of the executive would add. Doesn't mean that your bill won't succeed, but it certainly would add to it. So it might be worthwhile inquiring if they are minded to do so, or do so on behalf of the executive. The second thing is, you said that you had a number of meetings with permanent secretaries, and that they had said, or one had said, that this would certainly concentrate minds. But the more fundamental question is, when you met with permanent secretaries, whoever they were they supportive?
I think
as opposed to, this would concentrate our minds, and we don't want our minds to be concentrated.
Sir Humphrey.
I mean, to some extent, some have been more candid than others. As you know, it's not not for permanent secretaries to comment on policy, and you know, so they've very much given a perspective from the drafting and whatever. But some have been quite candid and some have been supportive. I think some in their demeanour would suggest they'd be more resistant. But the probably stock answer we've got, obviously, we'll take this back to our minister, and it's for them to dictate policy direction. You'll have more experience of how it actually works, but so that's kind of, you know. But I'd certainly say the person who said concentrate the minds, they said yes, and they were a relatively new permanent secretary, and I think they were suggesting that they felt there needed to be a bit more of what we're seeking to achieve, and that this would help.
Like on the local government side, there is, if you like, a baby version of this in the current bill that's before committee, which I don't think anybody is resisting, about a duty in law. I can't remember the precise terms of whether it's to cooperate or the lighter terms about having due regard to, or whatever it might be. I think it's more than that. I think there is a duty to cooperate in terms of community planning.
Yeah.
So it does seem to me that if the executive has signed off on a duty to cooperate in respect of one aspect, or a very significant aspect of local government, and all their functions and all their relationships with other statutory agencies and the government itself, it does seem to me that it's not a big leap to scale that up in terms of government departments. Which is another reason why I think that if we write to OFMDFM saying what's your view on this, to remind them that the executive has already endorsed this principle when it comes to life of government and local government rather, and its relationship with wider government, in order to try to give this, because my sense is from the bit of time that I was in government, I remember one occasion convening a meeting in North about York Gate. I might have told you this, and there were 4 ministers represented, and it was quite clear in the fallout from that meeting that one or other just didn't want to cooperate. When you've got a strategic site like the north side of the city, the Royal Exchange, York Street, city side, and the university proposal, it was clear that there needed to be some coherence between government departments. And let me put it this way, local politics and the geography of North Belfast got in the way of government departments working properly, even though 3 of the ministers in that room, BRD, DCAL and DOE, very much wanted to, but there was no requirement to, and consequently the whole thing came to naught at that stage anyway, because of, as I saw it, the conduct of one department.
And coming back to your point for me about scaling up, there is also a statutory duty in the autism bill and in the safeguarding bill. So it's something that is coming into legislation in Northern Ireland, and it is exactly that. It's scaling it up from some of the examples in specific areas to the broader range of children.
Okay. Thank you.
George Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. And, could I thank Stephen and Gareth for the presentation? My question, very briefly, have you give the presentation to any other committees, for example, health and education? You know,
we have briefed the Education Committee when we first launched the consultation, and we wrote to the Health Committee, and they were right in saying the Health Committee said not at this time, or it might have been just. We have written to other committees. Obviously, we don't set their agenda, so OFMDFM one has been the most engaging, and it's being called back. We have briefed education, but other committees have chosen not to have a briefing at this stage.
Just from children's point of view,
yeah,
people, I mean, they're very relevant.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Deal with children's. That's grand. Thank you very much.
No, thank you.
Bronwyn McGann.
Okay, thank you, Stephen and Gareth, for your presentation. You know, I generally welcome the concept of it, and you know, can I ask, in terms of improving outcomes under this bill, apart from what we've had before, can you give me some examples of improved outcomes under this bill as opposed to what we have now? And secondly, as well, in terms of what other departments can do, and I know reference was made to the Department of Regional Development. I think some of these departments do need to think outside the box. For example, if we didn't have the delay of the A5 west of the Ban, that would create jobs, create income, thereby improving, health and all of that there. So it's just to make that point as well. So if you could give me some examples.
Well, I think, obviously the legislation is in place, so I can't give examples of where it has worked, but maybe where I would see it work or where things haven't worked.
But how you would improve outcomes if you had this bill in place as opposed to what we have now?
Well, I think an example I would give, I visited an NGO in my constituency who were receiving funding from various government streams, as many of them do. They were working directly with children, and I think they had 5 different funding streams, and they had to report to 5 different funders, even though 3 of them were all within the Department of Health. And this is where the idea of the pooled budget goes in. If instead of having 5 departments funding early years interventions, we had a single pooled fund which each of those departments potentially fed into, we could have we would have an NGO on the ground that reports once, saving on administration. Also, the administration of that pooled fund would be by one set of administrators rather than 5 administrators in different departments. So it's ensuring that the resources, which we all know are limited, and they're always limited, but they're particularly limited now, during the downturn and the various cuts. It's ensuring the maximum resources actually get the children, rather than we spend on government administrators liaising with particular NGOs administrators. Because I'm sure that's a frustration many MLAs have come across, the inefficiency of continually having to reapply and reapply for various funding streams to the point where we have people employed solely for that purpose, when actually this money is set aside for children. For administrators. There will always be a need for administration, but we should minimise it where we can, and that's part of the potential of the bill.
Just to flag up as well, I mean, the original, in England, the duty to cooperate and the reforms of children's services were introduced following the tragedy of Victoria Climby. So that whole story of how services just weren't cooperating, which obviously had a safeguarding side to it as well, but the other side to that was the general level of collaboration wasn't good enough, and they recognised following that tragedy that there needed to be improved levels of collaboration to stop things like that happening again. So it goes right across the board, everything from safeguarding to, of course, funding streams, to share general levels of shared information between services, whether that be health and education, and who have contact with children. So in that sense, I mean, there's so many examples of how how we're hearing that collaboration could be improved, and I mean, we've had case studies that have come to us and saying if the 2 departments or if these 2 agencies collaborated, we would be able to achieve this, and we can certainly update you with some of those specific examples.
Thank you.
Crystal, Vice Chair.
Thanks, Chair. Apologies for not being here for the whole presentation today due to exceptional circumstances. I just want to offer my support for the work that you're doing. From an Alliance Party point of view, we regard statutory duty to cooperate between departments as a positive mechanism to improve outcomes and improve collaboration as well. So I wish you well with the work that you're doing in this regard. Can I ask, in relation to the Delivering Social Change framework that's been brought forward by OFMDFM, how do you see your proposals fitting within that framework or working with that framework?
It's hard to know, because I think we're still learning what delivering social change is, but I think in terms of what they're seeking to achieve with delivering social change, they're complementary. Again, they seem to be trying to bring a focus and trying to bring cooperation between departments. In terms of how it's being administered, and still in terms of funding, there's still a lot of unknowns. But to me, they seem to be moving in the same direction. Now, the one thing I've said, and I've heard delivering social change being used as an example as to why we don't need this bill. I would say, well, that happens to be the flavour of the day, so to speak. That's what will be done potentially for a limited period. This is trying to put something more permanent in place, and as I put it earlier, it's trying to make good practice, if that's what we do see as an outcome of delivering social change, and make it common practice. And as I say, if we make it a requirement, the collaboration is part of the job rather than the latest diktat that has come down through the OFMDFM. It becomes the norm rather than, as I say, just the particular focus of the day. So I do see it as complementary. I'm yet to hear anything that says what we're doing is contradicting what OFMDFM is currently trying to do in conjunction with the other departments. But as I say, I suppose we're still seeing the outworkings of delivering social change, and as you'll know, through the all-party group in children and young people, and I've engaged with that and engaged with OFMDFM as well as with this bill. And as I say, at this point, I don't see any contradiction, though some will use delivering social change to say we don't need this. But as I say, I see them as complementary, but I still see, even if delivering social change delivers everything it sets to, I still think we need the statutory duty to put into legislation the requirement to collaborate and to do what the Permanent Secretary said, concentrate minds, and make it when... and something I've always said about civil servants, and I mean as a compliment, but it could be taken both ways. They do their jobs, and the target is to make this their job, collaboration. Because I do believe civil servants will seek to do their jobs, and it's when they sit down with a list of priorities, I want this to be one of their priorities.
And the Office of First and Deputy First Minister has committed to conducting a children's budgeting pilot as well. Is that a mechanism that you see statutory duty cooperate with working well alongside as well?
I think, again, I see it as complementary, and again, you'll know with your work in the all-party group for children and young people the importance of early years, and we had the discussion earlier about the Swedish model, for example. We believe they put in more resources into children. We can only really have that discussion when we know exactly how much resources we do put into children's services in the broadest sense. But early years intervention, there's no doubt in long-term thinking, is exactly where our policy and our resources need to be put. I think children's budget, and again, I suspect some of the resistance to children's budget is it will highlight that we're not currently doing that, and the shift is needed. But the children's budget will show us to the extent. Again, I think it's complementary to this bill. It's a separate aspect of work, but it's certainly something I would welcome.
Final question, Chair. The Delivering Social Change signature projects, I think, have shown how departments can work together, how OFMDFM can identify cross-cutting themes that are relevant for children and young people. However, the Delivering Social Change for Children and Young People strategy recently launched has a particularly short consultation time. Is there anything in the face of your bill or any suggestions that you would have for the need for greater cooperation between departments and NGOs, community organisations, who are obviously vital partners to achieving better outcomes?
I mean, in the sort of second duty of this bill is the planning, commission and delivery of children's services, and I think that collaboration can only be helpful in terms of, whilst NGOs of course feed into strategy as well, that delivery on the ground, there's no as well as the agencies, particularly within health and education. I think the NGOs are that other arm not of government as such, because they're non-government organisations, but the other key deliverers of services. So it's essential that cooperation exists there, and I think there's goodwill in the sector to do that. So again, it's the other piece of the jigsaw, I suppose.
Thanks, Chair.
Alex Maskey has a follow-up.
Sure, it's a kind of one question really, and it's not even necessarily for today, it's just to think about. In terms of the duty to cooperate and so on, as I said earlier on, I think we're all very much sympathetic with that. But, and I think like we'd referred to this earlier on there, where you can get almost like the veto on operation. You know, he doesn't want to do something then that's going to hold everybody else back. Have you considered how this particular duty might conflict, if it does, with the executive authority of ministers? Because obviously, as you know, the way in which this executive works, these institutions works, you know, where the ministers have executive authority, and obviously then certain issues have to be brought back into the executive if they're contentious or whatever. But there is still a certain degree of executive authority within the department. Do you see this in any way conflicting on that?
Just checking if I understand your question. I think in terms of that kind of executive agreement being required, I think almost in children's strategies it would make that more the case than less so. And you know, because it would be saying that the children are cross-cutting. So if you're doing something with children, it needs to be in collaboration with your government partners. So I think it would bring children's issues more to the executive level than individual department level. And I accept that there's probably pros and cons with that. The pro being you don't get, for example, and not the sixth strategy that starts at age 3, but at the same time it does require agreement on the executive part to move issues.
I mean, the reason why I press that is it's not to protect executive authority per se, but there is that which is currently in existence, and really where there are cross-cutting programme for government commitments, for example, there are very detailed delivery plans across a range of departments. I don't think we're good enough at the scrutiny of those delivery plans, because if you actually do your work properly, you will certainly be shining a big bright light on where people do need to cooperate. That's on the basis that the ministers are coming together, the Assembly's had its debate, and then you have the programme for government commitments, and then you have to live that, and you have their implementation plans. I am as much concerned about people going in on the minimal end of the scale as opposed to going on the maximum, if you know what I mean. So if you have a duty to cooperate, I think, as Alec early on has suggested, you might have a tendency for some departments, or even ministers in that matter, to basically to win on the lower end of the scale because they don't want to make commitments which are outside their core business. So I'm just trying to work out how do we guard against those unintended consequences. I appreciate you wouldn't maybe be able to give a full answer on that, but I think we need to think these things.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of cooperation, there will be a report back to the Assembly, and we will have the opportunity to scrutinise that and would put, you know, when it's been, before it's been laid before Assembly, there's a pressure. We have to be able to justify this in the chamber, and I think that level of scrutiny on it is important. And we specifically said require an Assembly debate on it, so it's not simply lay a report, but it's lay a report and have a debate on it. So you know, there will be a pressure from ministers to, you know, don't make us look bad here. We have to stand up front of the Assembly and defend this. And again, it was in conversation with, I can't remember which particular permanent secretary, but said, you know, that's the sort of thing that, in their experience, ministers take seriously, you know, and so it adds. There's no foolproof piece of legislation, and this piece of legislation won't be a panacea, but we have tried to make the scrutiny of collaboration at such a level that it does become a priority.
I think as well, just to add, you know, if there's one thing that perhaps the executive could collaborate, you know, or could find common ground on, it's children, and the fact that everybody wants what's best for children, and in that sense that we would very much trust that, you know, that would be in the interests of everybody in the executive, and therefore this could be something that the executive could get behind and actually work together on for the next generation's sake, you know, and bring society forward.
Okay.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you both. A couple of questions to finish by me, and I think everybody agrees that better government does require that horizontal cross-cutting kind of work that you were trying to promote. But just in terms of, again, being clear about the exact benefit of making it a statutory duty as opposed to all the other expressions we've discussed, what do you think the benefit is of making it a statutory duty for cooperation as opposed to having a specified outcome as a programme for government target?
Again, I would see them as complementary. I think the statutory duty, as I say, would concentrate minds, would make it part of the job of civil servants to cooperate. It's part of their priority. So it's in trying to achieve the outcomes. The outcomes as outlined in the bill are, as I say, mirror what's in the children's strategy, and they can be changed by order. To some extent, we're not wedded to those specific outcomes because research might change and evidence might say, actually, here's the most important areas that children need to do well. So that's something almost to hang the duty to collaborate, and that's the key issue. Of course, the programme for government commitments are almost, I would say, sit a rung below a statutory duty in terms of priority. I think most departments, they will be by which they're judged. But a legal requirement, I think, has just that bit of extra weight. And I think as well, as I say, like the outcomes in this, the outcomes in any programme for government will change every 4 years. I think collaboration, I don't see any reason why in 5 years' time a new government would say collaboration is a bad idea now. It's been shown to be something we don't want. Those outcomes, as I say, through research and evidence may change, but the statutory duty to me is something that, the collaboration, sorry, to me is a kind of universal good in the sense that it will always remain something that will benefit the delivery of outcomes. As I say, the outcomes themselves may change, but the collaboration will always be necessary.
The Commissioner for Children and Young People has taken an interest, as you know, in strategic delivery from the Bob government. I think she employed Queen's University to do research. Is she supportive of your bill?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's fair to say I've the support of the vast majority of the children's NGO sector, including the Children's Commissioner.
And have you consulted?
I have. We've consulted with the sector. Well, we've consulted publicly.
And the results?
And we got
around 30 responses, and nobody was opposed.
Yeah.
I think everybody said yes, they were in favour.
This is something they backed, and as I say, it will be in a number of. So, for example, Children in Northern Ireland have brought out a key policy document, and their two key policy priorities were statutory duty and children's budget. The Children's Commissioner has produced the report you've outlined, and. Yeah, we've got very positive feedback from the sector. That's right. Okay,
final question. When are you hoping to introduce the bill?
I'm always nervous with that question. But well, just because I think I probably said to one group last year that it would be ready by last Easter. But the drafting and such things are out of our control. But I would hope within the next sort of 4 to 6 weeks.
I don't want to make you nervous. I'll change the question.
Yeah.
You said you were bringing the bill forward last Easter. What's going on?
No, I think 4 to 6 weeks.
Okay.
But if I breach that, I apologise.
Okay, Stephen Agnew and Ross Brown, thanks both very much.
Thank you a lot.
So, members, we have a proposal from Alex Atwood that we write to OFMDFM asking for their views on the private members' bill, and also taking it that we can establish the bit of legislation which details that there is a precedent for a duty of cooperation, which Alex thinks is with regard to local government, that we remind them of that precedent within the letter.
In the bill, it's in the draft bill.
A draft bill on local government? Right.
For the committee at the moment.
Oh, excellent. Okay. So all content that we write in those terms to the department?
Okay, thank you very much.
Members, we now have our second briefing of the day. This is from the department on the mid-year review of the Executive's EU priorities for 2013-14. In terms of information, beginning at 150 in your electronic plaque, you'll find the clerk's brief, which highlights outstanding issues in relation to Europe. Then page 153 is a copy of the mid-year progress report. And at pages 184 onwards, research papers which the committee considered recently in relation to EU competitive funding. So we welcome back Dr. Jerry Mulligan and Dr. Paul Geddes. You're both very welcome. Jerry, are you making the opening statement?
With your permission, Chair, I would
100%.
welcome the opportunity to make a few opening remarks. In particular, to give a brief overview of some of the key developments since I last appeared before the committee, and equally briefly something of a forward look of some of the things that will be of particular interest to us over the coming months, if that's okay. Significant among the developments, I would say, would be the publication of the Commission's work programme in October, which outlined the Commission's priorities for the coming year. Some of these would be a continuation from previous work programmes, and some of them will carry on into the next work programme. But significantly, they were structured around the need to deal with the financial crisis, measures to complete the single market, justice measures and external actions, particularly around accession and dealing with neighbourhood countries. On the funding side, Chair, some significant developments. We now have completion of agreed sums for structural funding for Northern Ireland over the next 7 years, with around 600 million allocated for the 7-year period. And Department of Finance and Personnel are in the lead in that respect. Common Agriculture Policy allocation of over $2 billion for the next 7 years. Again, obviously, the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development in the lead there. On competitive funds, now that the budget has been agreed for the 14 to 20 period, calls are beginning to appear, and significant among these, Horizon 2020, on research and development and innovation, Erasmus Plus, which is focusing on training, employment and mobility issues, and currently Creative Europe, which is of particular interest to our creative industries and those involved in those industries. On the policy side, very recently we've seen the Public Procurement Directive completed just last week, sorry, no, it was earlier this month, and I mean, it has particular implications for public sector procurement in that it departs very much from the lowest tender wins principle, allowing for other issues such as social and environmental considerations to feature in public sector procurement. It also simplifies the system for procurement from bidders who don't have to present all the detailed documents. Only those who are bidding then present the detailed documents. So this was an important simplification from the Commission's perspective. Climate and energy package proposals were released last week by the Commission after much debate and negotiation, and they are moving from binding targets at national level on the use of renewables to targets at a European level. State aid guidelines of significance for us in terms of government support to industry and foreign direct investment are well advanced, as indeed are regulations around banking union intended to avoid the sorts of banking crises which have been a feature of the recession in recent years. In Brussels, the Executive's Office, the Office of Northern Ireland Executive in Brussels, has been busy with ministerial programmes, other visits and events. We welcomed Ministers Bell and McCann from our department in December. They had an opportunity to have a wide-ranging programme. Of particular interest were some of the meetings they held on children's internet security with DG Connect. Minister Hamilton was visiting for the first time as Finance Minister in December also. Minister O'Neill on the CAP negotiations, and we welcomed Minister Ford to the Justice and Home Affairs Council in December as well. Assembly committees, we welcomed the Department of Employment and Learning Committee, the Department of Regional Development Committee and the Assembly Business Trust, so we've been quite busy, Chair, with a number of these programmes. Events. Again, I'll not go into the detail, but significant among these were our Open Days Week participation, where the Commission once again allocated us the status of official venue. The Office hosted a major event on innovation, which featured agri-food, innovation in the agri-food sector. And there have been other partnership seminars as well throughout the period. Our culture programme, sponsored by the Northern Ireland Arts Council, continues to strengthen our image and our reputation in Brussels. Worth mentioning in passing, Chair, a couple of awards that are important to us. One of them is the award DHSS PS steered Northern Ireland towards achieving recognition by the European Commission as a 3-star reference region for innovation in the area of healthy and active ageing. And that will be of particular significance, particularly when it comes to applications for funding. Other regions will want to join the region that has the status of 3-star reference region.
Is that the top? 3-star?
It was the most prestigious award, and Minister and Permanent Secretary and other officials came over to Brussels to receive the awards. That was quite an achievement. Also worth mentioning, Chair, that the Belfast City Council steered Belfast towards being recognised as one of the most accessible cities in Europe, and on the 3rd of December it received from the Commissioner this recognition. Our ministers attended the award ceremony as well, along with the delegation from Belfast City Council and the previous Lord Mayor as well, who would have had a significant input into that. But they were shortlisted. They were within the first top 7 of over 100 applicants, so it really was quite an achievement for Belfast City Council. Looking forward, on the Belfast side, Chair, there has been considerable focus on getting an agreement on the Executive's European priorities for 2013-14, and the report which you have before you, of course, which was agreed by the Executive in December, is the mid-year review, mid-year progress report on those actions against those priorities, 98% of which have been or are likely to have been met. And that was the position on the 30th of September, reported in that particular document, Chair. Briefly looking forward, we are currently in the Greek presidency. It is said of presidencies that they don't necessarily change the direction of policy, but it's a bit like taking something that's on a rail. You keep it moving like a train, and the challenge is how far you move it. But really, it's not expected that the direction of policy will change significantly. The Greeks have set their 4 priorities as growth, jobs and cohesion, further EU-Eurozone integration, the migration, borders and mobility, and maritime policy. The committee will be interested to note that the Commission intend to carry out a mid-term review of its 2020 strategy, and you'll recall that the 2020 strategy was anchored around 5 key targets dealing with education, that was reducing dropouts in education across Europe, environment, in terms of reducing emissions, increased use of renewables and increased energy efficiency, innovation, employment and poverty reduction. Those were the 5 key areas of targets. And they will be consulting widely across Europe, starting in the spring 2014, and the exercise will last for 1 year. At this point in time, the current statistics show that positive progress has been made in relation to 3 of the 5, education, environment and innovation, have all been seen to have moved in the direction of the targets positively. Not so in the case of employment and poverty reduction, unfortunately. In terms of the policy horizon over the next few months, we will continue to take a close interest in state aid, and in particular how it's finalised, the guidelines on state aid, how they're finalised, interpreted and applied by the Commission. Public procurement, obviously, there's a need to transpose the directive in the months ahead. Justice, in the justice area, the current framework of priorities for justice is called the Stockholm Programme. That is coming to an end, and that will be replaced, and there will be discussions and negotiations on what will be the priorities in the justice area, so we will need to keep a close eye on that. Politically, as you know, Chair, there will be a change in the Commission. There's likely to be a number of new commissioners appointed. The Commission is reaching the end of its mandate, as indeed is the Parliament. And the office will have as its priority renewing our relations with commissioners, the new group of commissioners, as the year progresses. Finally, Chair, and you'll be aware that we were very pleased that the Economic and Social Committee President, Mr Melos, has indicated his intention to bring his entire presidential team, his board, if you like, to Belfast to do their to do business in April. And I understand you'll be meeting with the President at that time, as indeed will our ministers as well. So those are some of the things that we're looking to in the months ahead, Chair. So I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, Jerry, thank you very much. Busy as always. Could I start with, you have a reference in your report to 113 individual targets which constitute the European Priorities 2013-14 implementation plan. And when you were with us back in October, I don't think you were in a position to give us the implementation plan, but we still don't have it. I mean, is there an issue why the committee shouldn't have sight of the implementation plan?
The implementation, this is not the progress report on this. I understood, Chair, that the implementation plan would have been with you at this stage.
Chairman, if I could come in, what normally happens is that the European priorities are agreed by the executive, so effectively what you have is the top-level strategic orientation. The second part of the process is that the departments who constitute the Barroso Task Force Working Group then begin to build up a series of targets from the bottom up. That becomes a working implementation plan, which is in fact the mid-year report. As we move through the year, we simply put in the material into the RAG rating scores, and effectively the implementation plan becomes the mid-year report and eventually the end-of-year report. So because the executive had agreed its priorities in September, the first part of the process was to report back to the executive on those priorities, which was done on the 16th. The implementation plan was collapsed to become the mid-year report at that point.
So what is on the left hand?
If there's a longer time period, then between agreement on the priorities, if they're agreed, for example, in June, as they were last time round, then the implementation plan is normally provided to the committee well in advance of any mid-year report. But because the decision-making process was eclipsed this time round, effectively what you have is both the implementation plan and the mid-year report, and it will also be the end-of-year report which the committee will receive after March once the executive has agreed it. So that explains why there was no formal document presented to the committee.
So what we're looking at in this document on the left-hand side, for example, SC 4.1, organise at least 2 events throughout the year. That is the implementation plan, and what comes on the right with the RAG indicator and the commentary.
Yes.
Is
and the other things that say, if we look at page 6 in terms of the mid-year report, the overall progress summary would not be within the implementation plan because there wouldn't be anything to report against it at that point. Similarly, at the front end of the mid-year report, the section on successes wouldn't be there because there would be nothing to report at that point in the process.
So to be crystal clear, this document, we should have had sight of that previously without the mid-term report.
Yes, if the normal timeline had prevailed, then the answer to that is yes. But because the timeline was eclipsed, as it were, then the 2 documents became one over an extremely short period of time.
Okay.
So the committee is not lacking any information in relation to the implementation plan because it's all included here, plus the mid-year reporting position correct to the 30th of September.
As we stand today, we're not missing any information, but as I understood what you said previously, if the process had been implemented to time and as planned, we would previously have had the left-hand side of this document.
Yes,
Thank you.
which
Okay.
was the committee's position in the last financial year, Chairman.
Target 1.2, which I think is members page 159 of your electronic pack, takes us to the question of benchmarking in drawing down competitive EU funds. This has been an issue that has been around for a while. I think the latest target was March 2014. It's marked as amber. It was to have been discussed at the October Barroso Task Force Working Group meeting. Can you tell us the outcome of that, please, Jerry?
Indeed, Chair. At that meeting, it was decided that we needed to, as the report indicated, facilitate the exercise, and important that was to ensure a coordinated approach to benchmarking. We held a meeting of those departments who would have a particular interest in particular programmes. At the meeting, it was decided that the best approach would be to allocate a particular programme, such as Horizon 2020 or Lifelong Learning, to a lead department, and that they would then carry out the benchmarking on that particular programme, indicating the comparator regions, the parameters that they were going to use, the statistics they were going to use to compare, and produce the outcome of that in due course. So a number of departments have been taking this forward, and we are due to review progress at the next meeting of the interdepartmental group, which is on the 12th of February.
I have understood that correctly. You're then suggesting we're moving away from the original objective of identifying a single European region against which we would benchmark ourselves on a continuum, and are now saying there's a decision being made that the benchmarking will be specific to the programme, and therefore the region will vary depending on the programme.
The region could vary depending on the programme.
So why did you change TAC?
To enable us to have regions where there was evidence of involvement and interest in particular programmes, because if we had taken a region that hadn't been particularly involved, then it might not have provided as much information. The purpose of the benchmarking was to identify best in class. So, in a sense, we're looking for those regions that have been involved in particular programmes.
So why did it take 2 goes to identify the best way forward?
I think we needed to have a detailed discussion about what we wanted to get from the exercise, which would be useful for the purpose of setting targets and learning from best practice. We do have information on our absolute drawdown. We were anxious to ensure that we had comparative information to see how our absolute performance compared to relative performance.
Well, we got information from the Assembly researchers, I think it was last week, presented on Framework 7, which suggested that the drawdown per head of population in Northern Ireland was €35 per head, plus a few cents. Comparable to Wales, in fairness. But for our €35 per head, the Republic of Ireland drawdown €590 per head.
And again, I think there's an important, in looking at the figures, that might well disguise the differences of approach between the two jurisdictions.
Which one do you think is doing better?
Well, I think if you factor in the funding of research and development in our universities is done on a very different basis to that in Ireland, in the Republic of Ireland. And as I understand it, the Republic of Ireland have indicated that research and development will be largely funded ex-exchequer, which means that there's a strong pressure on academics to participate in and be successful in getting research funding. Our academics and universities are funded from the Research Excellence Framework, which accounts for about 80% of funding. If that was factored in other words, if you were to look at the entire amount spent on research and development, as a proportion of GDP, which is one of the targets referred to earlier on, 2020, you might find that the figures are more comparable. So these are the sorts of issues that the department that leads on 2020 will be looking at to ensure that we are making like comparisons.
Okay, well, if we leave aside the 590 that the Republic gets for every 35 we get in that specific programme, the drawdown target of 12 million of competitive funds by Northern Ireland departments, 1st of April 13 to 31st March 14, has a green light. Departments continue to draw down competitive EU funding on target. Were we lacking in ambition?
I think, Chair, we'll always want to set challenging stretch targets, and we keep targets continuously under review. I have no doubt that the work and effort and resource that's going into achieving those targets is significant. There will be an opportunity to review the targets again, and if it's felt that the targets will be reviewed, then ministers may well indicate that. But I wouldn't, on the basis of my working with departments and knowing what they're doing, there is a significant effort that's being made to draw down and to step up to that challenge.
Okay, let me ask you about the effort. Could you tell me how many drawdown opportunities have been identified by your desk officers and how many applications were subsequently submitted?
I don't have that detail, Chair, that I could reliably advise the committee on. I know that there's been a significant raising of awareness of opportunities in general, and the desk officers have contributed to that. Departments also have been working locally to increase awareness and to increase their support of applications, because I mean it is important to take account of the fact that departments don't normally, under European rules, directly draw down programmes. They will do so through third-party organisations, non-departmental public bodies, universities, volunteers, and departments are pressing those groups, helping those groups, and raising awareness among those groups to increase their drawdown with departmental assistance.
Yeah, I get that, but surely you would want to monitor then the output and the outcome from all that effort by your desk officers and others in identifying opportunities and encouraging third parties to apply.
Well, we try and track successful applications, but sometimes sometimes the organisations involved might not necessarily let us know when they've been successful. And
why not?
They may not identify if it's a voluntary community sector organisation. They may not recognise our particular interest. That information will have to come through via departments.
Would they not necessarily let you know whether they've been successful, or would they not necessarily let you know whether they've even applied?
Well, we would certainly like to be kept informed of both applications and the outcome, but we can't guarantee that everyone.
Do you ask them to let you know?
We would not directly, because there's so many different organisations. Departments. This
is taxpayers' money you're putting into researching and encouraging. Why wouldn't you say to those organisations, we would like to know A, if you apply, and B, what the outcome is?
It would be something that departments would do as a matter of their formal engagement with the organisations that they are assisting. So if a department is involved with the Northern Ireland Youth Council or those organisations that are involved in drawing down money, I would be surprised if they were not kept informed about success and applications.
Including OFMDFM?
Well, OFMDFM won't have direct applications to particular programmes at the moment. They would certainly...
No, but encouraging third parties.
They would be encouraging third parties, and including through its participation in the Northern Ireland European Regional Forum.
So they would know how many organisations were encouraged to apply, how many applied, and what the success rate was.
I would expect that the monitoring systems that the department has in place could generate that sort of information.
Chair, if I can just come in on that, because the role of OFMDFM in relation to the Programme for Government Commitment is to facilitate delivery of the target. And therefore, our first approach in all of this is to request information from departments as the point of contact. But the ownership that departments take for delivering against the target, which is a collective responsibility, is then corralled through the 4 thematic groups. So that's where a lot of that information is shared. I think the committee is probably aware from previous evidence sessions that the department also co-chairs the Northern Ireland European Regional Funding Forum, and it's effectively through the Equality Command that takes place. Now, at present, there is a basic website for that particular forum, and that's going to be expanded in the near future as part of the EU Capacity Building Fund that the department runs. We're also going to perhaps enhance the NIERF database of contacts, and we're also developing a database to gather relevant information in relation to the funding applications that have been made by members of that particular forum. And that will also be extended as well to capture applications made in association with the EU Capacity Fund. So it's not strictly true to say that that information is not being captured. We are not aware centrally of it because our locus and interface is the hard tangibles around how much drawdown did you secure for the region. But at the point of implementation through departments, through thematic groups and through the Northern Ireland European Regional Forum, that information is being, I think, captured to some extent and shared.
Okay, so the data is captured. You might even know where it's being held. Is anybody interrogating it to make sure that we're getting good value for money and that we learn lessons and that we do better next time?
Yes, I would assume that people are doing that, but I have no direct evidence of that.
Sorry, Paul, I would assume. Who are you assuming? Who are you assuming is doing it?
I am assuming that the policy leads who have the policy competence and responsibility to deliver against the target are aware, in working with their arm's length bodies and their third parties, where these applications are coming from and what they need to do to succeed in a competitive environment.
Can I take it that because you are assuming, you've never asked?
I personally have never asked. What I'm asking about is, what is your hard drawdown against the 20% target? Because that is the department's primary role in relation to the Programme for Government Commitment. Those are the questions that I ask. Allied to that, we are asking questions about benchmarking. And what we hope to do through the benchmarking exercise, the fact that we are working through 9 EU funding sources does not imply that over the course of this financial perspective, i.e. from 2014 to 20, that we will not build a picture of the most successful regions in relation to competitive funding by various policy priority areas. So it's not mutually exclusive.
No, but
and our intention is to target the most productive areas for this region to engage and draw down monies.
Well, I want to go away and reflect on the fact there's been a change in terms of the benchmarking, because this isn't news to me, but I mean, it was my understanding that the genesis of this was that it was felt that the benchmark against the Republic of Ireland was not fair, in that we were a region of the United Kingdom comparing ourselves against a nation state. And to an extent, I get that. But I thought that the move was going to be to find a comparable region, and the debate then was, what is a comparable region? And then we would constantly compare ourselves against that, rather than saying who's done best on any particular programme. And I say I need to go away and reflect on that, but I don't understand why we've changed, why we needed 2 goes, and will there be a 3rd go at establishing a benchmarking process?
I mean, I think what drives benchmarking is the availability of good quality data that facilitates comparisons. And that is a major issue.
That doesn't exist?
It may exist in certain cases. It may not exist in others. So if you are benchmarking by European Union funding source, competitive funding sources, the likelihood is that within a funding source, the quality of the data will be better. If you wish to move to the other end of the scale, where there are broad-based regional comparisons, primarily driven by socioeconomic indicators, then your capacity to drill down and ask the most relevant questions in relation to funding are likely to be compromised, because the comparison basis is different. So the evolution, it's not two goes at a particular problem. It's a matter of evolving your thinking and policy response in relation to the challenges that you encounter as you move forward.
You could also argue there's a difference between having a benchmark which you might consider to be compromised, accept that, and not having a benchmark at all.
Well, I think we're absolutely clear that currently against the Programme for Government target, we have absolute success in terms of absolute drawdown. We're also very clear that we need to make that assessment of performance on a relative as well as an absolute basis, so there must be benchmarking, and that has been broadly accepted by ministers and departments. And it's foreseen in the Programme for Government Delivery Plan. But the completion period for that in the delivery plan is through to March 2015, in recognition that this is a particularly difficult area. And it's driven primarily by the availability of reliable data that will facilitate meaningful comparisons so that the right questions can be asked. And that's where departments currently are.
Chair, if I can maybe supplement some of what Paul's saying, and I'll just give you a flavour of some of the questions that departments will be asking as they take this work forward. And these were questions that we posed to them in our discussions on benchmarking. I mean, obviously, the questions about what the drawdown figures are central, but how competitive is the fund? For example, are there national allocations or other mitigating factors? Because some of these will be allocated on a quota basis. So again, that has to be considered in benchmarking. Are there particular structural differences to how the fund is managed in Northern Ireland compared to other regions? What are the critical factors, obstacles to successful drawdown funds? Are there any known changes in new programmes that are likely to affect us differently from other areas? Those are just some of the questions that departments will need to address in choosing the comparators and in discussing the implications of differences that they may find. So that is not to say that it's that those questions can't be answered. But those are some of the methodological issues departments are dealing with.
Okay, let's move off for a moment the idea of benchmarking back to the 113 individual targets in your plan. I'm looking at example at 3.2, deliver, 3.3, beg your pardon, 3.3, participate in at least 3 EU-themed weeks in Brussels by the end of March 2014. I'm not disputing that there is a value in participating in EU-themed weeks in Brussels. But as a target, would you accept that as an input? And how do you measure the output and the outcome of attending that? Given you're using taxpayers' money to run the operation and improving the economy is at the heart of everything we do, how does that target, which is actually an input, have a measurable outcome at the end of it?
Okay. A lot of this is would be qualitative in that you cannot readily identify the increase in partnerships, consortia, etc., that result from events such as participation in themed weeks, but undoubtedly it happens. Conversely, if we weren't to be present in Brussels, it is unlikely that we would make contact with those potential partners in projects. Our reputation would not be as enhanced as it has been through participation, because bear in mind, Chair, that these events are opportunities for us to show off our innovation, to show off our industry, to show off our competitiveness, And in that sense, in a qualitative sense, it would be important that we have that opportunity.
Yeah. And I'm hoping being clear, I don't dispute the value of the office, the Northern Ireland Executive Brussels, the value of the desk workers. I'm just wondering to what extent out of the 113, how many of them have specific outputs and outcomes such as 1.1, the 12 million competitive funds drawdown, and how many of them are these kind of qualitative inputs such as attending EU weeks? Can you split down the 113 between the two?
Well, I think there's a quantitative element to participation, Chair, in that the relevant department has committed to a minimum engagement. Now, the outcome from that, the output from that will be that they do participate in the number of themed weeks that they committed to. But beyond that, the outcome of that is very difficult, as you might have explained, to measure.
How many of the 113 are kind of solid outcomes like £12 million of competitive drawdown?
I haven't made that calculation, Chair, but I mean, again, it wouldn't be relatively straightforward to categorise them in that way.
Right. Do you have a preference when you're drawing up your targets as to whether they're those kind of softer qualitative or the harder we will achieve this?
Well, from the point of view of monitoring, clearly the harder targets are more straightforward. Qualitative targets should nonetheless not be downgraded, particularly if they are important in terms of achieving the longer term objectives of either increasing our drawdown or increasing our influence in policy. So I mean, again, there's no hard and fast answer to is one better than the other. It depends on really how much that target and the achievement of that target then contributes to the interests of the region.
Okay. You mentioned earlier the natural churn of commissioners, and we're coming to one of those points. And President Barroso's term runs out in October of this year. I believe he has also indicated that he is unlikely to go for a third term.
That's correct.
Okay, so where does that leave the task force?
Well, the task force is a relationship with the Commission and the head of the Commission. We will certainly work with the Commission to maintain a structured relationship, and the importance of the task force and that structure that exists shouldn't be underestimated. Whether it is called the Barroso Task Force or whether it's referred to as a Northern Ireland Support Group is not of that significance, but I think what we do need to have is a recognition by the Commission that this unique initiative, in that it doesn't apply to any other region across the EU, needs to continue, and we'll work very hard at that, Chair.
But that will ultimately, will it not be a decision for the next president, whoever he or she may be?
It would be. The question would be whether the next president would accept the need for a continued relationship.
Well, presumably one of the measures of success of the Barroso Task Force working group will be the number of other regions who lobby the new president for a task force for their region. So if the number's nil, we'll be thinking, oh dear. And if it's 100 regions, we'll be thinking, what a fantastic job you've done.
Well, again, going back to the origins of the task force, it was recognition by President Barroso that we were at a particularly important stage in our social, economic and political development that deserved a unique initiative such as this. There have been the need for continuation of the work, I think, is generally recognised among those in the Commission that we work with. We still have economically, we have suffered very badly as a result of the recession. So what progress we were making up to that point was to some extent stymied. So economically, I would say that the argument is still strong. Socially and politically, likewise. So I would hope to present that case to the Commission. I would hope that they would be responsive to it. I would also suggest that the Commission see advantages in the type of structured arrangement we have, because it is a model of inter-services cooperation that I think the Commission appreciate. So for that reason, I think that there may well be an interest in continuation as well.
A theme we were discussing in our previous presentation. So presumably when you make your case and you do your lobbying, one of the things you'll say is this Barroso task force has done wonderful things, and the top 5 are.
Top 5 are, if you look at what we expected of
What top 5 achievements, not expectations?
The top 5 achievements would be the significant improvement in our engagement as recommended by the task force report. In other words, if you look at the task force report recommendations, I'd be confident that we would have met a significant number, if not all of those recommendations, including having more people seconded to European institutions, including gaining protected geographical indicator status for some of our fine food produce. These were the sorts of very practical things that came out of that Commission task force report. So top of the list would be the benefit of following the recommendations in the task force report. The other thing that we asked of the Commission was their participation in events, and we have been very successful in attracting senior Europeans to the region to participate. And indeed, tomorrow is an example of that sort of event where we have a seminar jointly hosted by the Commission, the task force representatives, or the relevant task force representatives involved as well, looking at innovation in the connected health area. And that's in the Titanic Centre tomorrow. So again, that's an example of the Commission's willingness to pay attention to us. The other area is in timescales for Commission's consideration of issues. And without having broken the rules, I am aware that the Commission will give priority to consideration of issues that are important to us. And a few examples. Certainly one example that comes to mind was the state aid issue around Bombardier and the funding of Bombardier. We managed to get a Commission decision on that relatively quickly. And I would be confident that the task force was important in that regard, and continues to be in getting us access to meetings, access to officials, and we think decisions on a shorter time scale that might normally apply. So those are some of the benefits, Chair, that I would see of the task force.
Okay. Well, if members, Alex Hadley.
Some of the stuff that the Chair was speaking about, I'd like to pursue a bit further and widen it a wee bit. The first is that the last time you attended the committee, you confirmed that the ambition of Northern Ireland in terms of Horizon 2020 drawdown was around 100 million, twice FP7. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
And since that time, the Republic of Ireland has confirmed what their notional drawdown of Horizon 2020 would be. Isn't that right?
I understand that there's been a figure.
And the figure is?
It's close to $1 billion, as I...
No, isn't it?
It depends on whose figure.
The figure that the Irish government announced.
Well, I'm not familiar with the exact figure that they have come up with, but I understood that they were certainly looking to around about $1 billion in drawdown. But that's maybe an underestimate.
You see, it worries me, Jerry, that when we are looking at comparing places and places, and it's not apples and eggs, the drawdown is 1.4 billion. That's what they confirmed. It's not very impressive that you didn't know that it was 1.4 billion. And in any case, even more important than that is the fact that you know and I know that the Irish government's drawdown of FP7 notionally was €600 million, and that their actual drawdown is going to be closer to €900 million. And that when the Irish government says that their notional drawdown of Horizon 2020 is 1.4 billion, you and I know that their actual drawdown in their minds, they hope, is going to be closer to €2 billion. And the point of all that is that the differential between here and there seems to get bigger and doesn't seem to get any less. And yes, you're not comparing similar regions, let's be honest about that. There are differentiations between here and the south. But even the differentiations doesn't explain that gap. That our drawdown might be 100 million euro or pounds. Is it million or pounds? Is it euro or pounds?
What's pounds?
And the south is 1.4 billion euro officially, and probably a lot more operationally when the period is over. And that's the worrying bit. That's the worrying bit. That whatever way you cut and paste, we should be way beyond 100. And we should be moving in the direction the south is clearly doing so. The second point to make to you is there is no region in Europe that is comparable to this region. There may be regions in Europe that are more comparable to here than we are to the south, but there's no region that is comparable. And therefore, you seem to be chasing the Holy Grail when it comes to, well, what does our drawdown compare of the discretionary funds in Europe compare with other parts of Europe? Because there is no other part of Europe that's like us. Given the scale of our public sector, the limitations of our private sector, the scale and limits of our IT sector, and so on and so forth, and being part of the United Kingdom, and so on and so forth. There is no comparison. So what I worry about in this analysis that you're undertaking about, well, let's compare the north with somewhere else, is that it'll end up being guesstimate stuff at best, because objectively there's going to be no part of Europe that is like here, even though there may be parts of Europe that are more like here than the rest of Ireland. Is that not the reality of the exercise that you're undertaking?
Well, again, Chair, I'll invite Paul to comment as well. The purpose of the benchmarking exercise, I think I've said, was to learn from others, and indeed we have already learned from others. We've learned from the Republic of Ireland in terms of their sectoral approach to this. They had a number of specialists whose job it was to bring together academics and business people and to stimulate the process of application for research and development. So in benchmarking ourselves against the Republic of Ireland, even though we accept the differences in the numbers of universities and how research is funded, we've learned from that, and we've appointed, when I say we, DETI and DEL have appointed 7 specialists. So that's an example of where we've learned from others. At this point in time, I wouldn't rule out the possibility of learning more from other regions as well. And obviously, I agree that we don't have regions that are identical in every respect. We will have regions that are strongly reliant on small and medium-sized enterprises, and we'll look at what they do. We will have regions that have only 2 universities, and we'll look at what they do. But those are the sorts of ways in which, qualitatively, we're trying to find some way in which we can look at the activities, the relationships that they've built up, things like the numbers of assessors that they have on the committees in Europe is another example of what's important. So I think that the relevant organisations are learning all the time. The universities are learning, and business is certainly more acutely aware of the opportunities now than they were previously. So, I wouldn't for a minute suggest that DETI as a department, along with Invest and DEL, are not making a significant effort, to increase the drawdown, and what they've done with developing an application that's available on tablets is another example of increasing awareness, and so on.
Let's deal with that. Why wasn't this work undertaken long before now?
That's not a question I can answer, unfortunately, because as a department we're not responsible for research and development. I would...
But is it not across? It's not just research and development, it's discretionary funds where I presume you're benchmarking.
Oh, there'll be a variety of programmes, but the department, again...
But why hasn't this work been undertaken across before now?
Well, the department has not had direct responsibility for coordinating European programmes up until the executive agreed its target in Programme for Government. So from the point when Programme for Government set specifically the target of 20% increase in drawdown and better engagement in Europe, that is when the department then legitimately took on its coordinating role. So it was not having the mandate from the executive up until that point.
Which is 2011.
Which is 2011.
But it doesn't seem to me that benchmarking work, whilst it's ongoing, isn't advanced very much.
Well, I think there were a number of reasons for that. I mean, the first thing was to actually initiate all of the structures to support delivery of the target in the absolute sense, to agree definitions, to ensure that departments were engaged, ALBs and stakeholders, other stakeholders, third parties were engaged. As that emerged, then we went through a number of teething problems, which resulted in a mid-term revalidation exercise, which consumed a lot of time and resource. But benchmarking has always been foreseen in relation to the target from the very early days of delivery plan writing, and is still there. So now it has come more into focus, and it is being driven forward as energetically as we can. I mean, I think you're right in that there will never be a perfect regional comparator, or even potentially a group of perfect regional comparators. But, I mean, that's not the purpose of benchmarking. The comparators will be imperfect. The power of benchmarking is to be able to ask relevant questions that elucidate why the best performing regions can draw money down. And following that through, that's precisely why we have reoriented to move from the top down to the bottom up, and why we're now targeting the funding sources in the first instance. Because we have realised that if we look at the Commission report in 2007 or 2008, the Commission report included 5 comparator regions based on socioeconomic data. But the reality is it will not tell you a great deal about our performance in terms of competitive funds drawdown. So, I mean, I agree with that. So, effectively, what the 20% target has done today...
So are you replicating the work that...
No, we're not. We're not replicating work. We are...
Are you replicating part of the work?
No, we are targeting EU funding sources and determining within those funding sources and the policy areas that they are designed to enhance, that we are moving towards comparing our performance with the best in Europe, wherever they are located. And the initial focus on that has to be through networking and then partnership building. And that's part of what the executive foresaw in this process. This cannot be done overnight, it must be done over time, and it is being done very seriously. And at the end of the day, it's about best principles and best practice. That's what we need to secure to enhance our performance, no matter where that is located.
I think no one would disagree with your aspiration. It is, in operational terms, what is actually happening and how far and how fast is getting advanced. So let me ask this question. You said earlier that, I think it was Paul, you said it, that what is actually getting drawn down in terms of Northern Ireland is captured and shared somewhat. That was the language that you used. Now, given that OFMDFM has a strategic role in respect to Europe, and given that you're the coalface in Europe, is it the case that you don't know and OFMDFM don't know all that is coming into Europe through all the sources and all the departments? Because if we don't, is that not a yawning gap in terms of intelligence and data? And if it is a yawning gap in terms of intelligence and intelligence and data, why hasn't it got corrected before now?
Well, look, I mean, I think the fundamental issue here is that European engagement is decentralised within this region. It is not clustered into the centre either in terms of targeting.
The executive, that the government is the government and has a particular authority and a particular responsibility engagement with Europe. Are you saying that there's no communications that covers all bases in terms of all income coming into the north from European funds, that we don't know how much is coming into Europe in all the ways that it comes into Europe, be it public or private local councils are central government, voluntary and community, discretionary and other funds. Are you saying we don't know what the total figure is?
Chair, I think I would add that on funding which is pre-allocated, we clearly know what. On funding which is competitive, it is difficult to capture with confidence every success. We try. Departments will provide us with information on not necessarily the detail of who's being successful. That will be something departments will be aware of. So if it's a higher education establishment, Dell will undoubtedly know what each and every further education establishment is achieving. We will not know that as a central department. What we will know is the sum total of the funds that have resulted from that process. So at the centre, we have tended to concentrate not on the detail of who's being successful, but what the aggregate of the success looks like. And we've come through a very careful and detailed iterative process of getting that information available and making it available to this committee and to our ministers and executive as well.
Of all monies being drawn down by central government?
Of all monies been drawn down by central government and by third parties, arm's length bodies, NDPBs, and councils.
So you do know the total figure?
So the councils included. Sorry,
yes,
I just needed to ask a
yeah.
question.
Yeah.
So we do know the total figure?
We have a figure for the total competitive drawdown across all the programmes that are competitive.
I'm getting a little bit confused myself now, but could you share what is the total, not now, but could you provide information about what the total drawdown is? And I'm just confused. If you do know what the total drawdown is, why did Paul earlier say that it's captured and shared somewhat, unquote?
If I could say, I think Paul was, Paul can speak for himself clearly, but I think we're talking about the detail of who is being successful and who isn't being successful. We certainly know the aggregate of the outcome of that.
The earlier conversation, as I understand it, in relation to questions from the Chair related to activity in terms of making applications to a variety of competitive funding sources throughout Europe from within the region. And that is the activity that drives the drawdown. The Department's role in relation to the Programme for Government Target is to count the hard money. How much have you drawn down in conjunction with arm's length bodies or third parties? The Department has those figures. They have been reported publicly and through ministerial questions. In 2011-12, year one, we drew down 23 million. In 2012-13, year two, we draw down 18.3 million. So at the halfway point in the budget period, £41.3 million worth of competitive EU funds was drawn down, representing 64% of the target. That is the current drawdown position against the 20% target.
So just drawing from that, do you anticipate that the target will be met then in the drawdown period?
Departments are on progress to meet the target, and the overall target of 20% over 4 years is 64.4 million of competitive EU funds.
And we're on target to draw that down?
Yes, we are.
By 2014?
That's right.
By
2015.
March 2015.
Because you're getting a year after
Yeah.
the end of the period. To be fair to the officials, and I'm speaking against myself in some way now, this issue about Europe hasn't been cracked. That's the truth of it. So in the last few days I've spoken to some senior people, and they would argue that this issue about discretionary funds, especially Horizon 2020, doesn't get cracked until the corporation tax issue gets dealt with. I think that's rather simplistic, but that's one of the arguments that they would make. But overall, noting what you said about the 7 staff in Detty and Dell, if that's the scale of a response to what the opportunities it might be around a €80 billion fund like a Horizon 2020, then I think we're still going to stumble and fall rather than grasp the opportunity. And I would make the same argument across other government departments, including across DOE, because when I was in DOE, I didn't fully crack this either. So in terms of your answers, I've got some sympathy with you, because I think there's an issue on the political side that we still haven't cracked, and my sense is, as things stand at the moment, we're not going to crack.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Yes, I think just to go back to where I was, Paul's telling us how much money has been drawn down, and that's very useful information. What would be equally useful to me would be to know what effort was put into achieving that, and that's why I was asking, do we know how many organisations or particular people were encouraged, how many bids went in, and the success rate, but we moved on. Chris Little, the Deputy Chair.
Thanks, Chair. I realise it's late in the day, so I'm just going to make requests for some information that you can maybe provide the committee with when convenient. To build on what Mr. Atwood said, would it be possible to get a table with a breakdown of the competitive funds per department for those years that you mentioned, Paul?
Chris, can I just come in there? We did write to the department.
Oh, we did?
Asking for that on the 24th of October, and then we had another request on the 4th of December.
Okay.
So you could maybe take that away for us.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay, no problem. And perhaps if we get some more information in relation to the European Capacity Building Fund that has been agreed as well then. Can I ask, is it possible to give the committee an update in relation to future plans for the Northern Ireland Executive Office for desk officer staff complement?
Yes, I can certainly provide that now, Chair, if that's...
Yep.
The current arrangement involves 4 desk officers in each of the 4 theme areas of technology and innovation, employment, competitiveness, employment, social cohesion, and time and energy. After a review of the initiative and how it was working, the view of departments was that we should move to 3 priority themes, which would take account of all of the policy and programming, funding programming work in environment, the economy, and a social theme. So there are three themes that we will be supporting in the office. Those themes will then be mirrored in a number of groups of departments. So for the social theme, you will have a number of departments who will be involved in identifying their needs and what support they need from the Brussels end. So for in the social theme, for example, you would have Department of Social Development, you would have DEL, and you would have our own department, for example. So the idea of theme groups will continue, although on a reduced number of themes. And our proposal at the moment is that we should have, because research and development cuts across all of the themes, then that one of those officers will have a cross-cutting responsibility for coordinating the work the Brussels office does in supporting research and development, particularly Horizon 2020, across all of the three pillars, as it were. So we'll have 3 members of support staff. We will have one with a cross-cutting responsibility for Horizon 2020, and they will be mirrored in arrangements of brigade departments here within those three areas of social, economic, and environment. So those are the current plans.
When will the adjustment to that setup be made?
It will, whenever the current post holders come to the end of their contracts, then they'll be replaced with staff on secondment, who will then move out to Brussels, and we will try and make sure continuity, as much continuity as possible in the arrangements.
So the current 4 desk officers go?
Certainly there are 3 who are intending to move back to departments here.
Are those desk officers on secondment at the moment then?
Those desk officers are on secondment at the moment, and it would be seen to be I mean, secondments generally are seen as career opportunities, so they'll take back their experience back into departments.
Thanks, Chair.
George Robbins.
Thank you, Chair. And can I thank the officials for your presentation? My question's more parochial, maybe, than one of them, at least one of them, is it's in relation to the Korean to Londonderry Track Relay project. That was awarded 1.6 million. I want to know, was the ballerina halt included in that? There's an upgrade of the ballerina halt. I wanted to find out, was that included in the relay? I had a meeting with Translink officials a few months ago, and everything was coming to fruition, ready to rock and roll, basically. But all of a sudden, everything was pulled to say that maybe it'd be another couple of years and our ballerina halt project would come on stream.
But, Chair,
if you haven't got an answer for me now, you can send it to me in writing.
What we would do is well, I'll talk to the responsible officials, and we'll discuss the best way of getting that information to you as quickly as possible.
I would appreciate that.
Okay.
The other one was in relation to the installation of electric vehicle rapid charging points. I want to find out how much we were allocated here in Northern Ireland. There's £1.9 million was set aside. I want to know what that's for the whole island of Ireland. Find out from Northern Ireland's point of view how much of that was allocated to Northern Ireland. We have got one installed in the Valley, but again, it's a parochial issue. It's put on a parking bay, which is 1 hour and 2. So it's not going to be much good to this, but
Well, look,
at the same time, that's a side issue.
Well, look, I mean, I can confirm that according to the Department for Regional Development, that approximately €130,000 has been allocated to Northern Ireland for the installation of 5 rapid charging points.
5.
That's all the information I have. I have no indication of where the location of those points is.
Yes, well, as I say, I know at least one of them was put in the Mavari town itself. But it's just in the wrong location. So.
Okay, well, again, through the Chair, we'll discuss with relevant colleagues how we can get that information to you as
appreciate that.
as possible.
Yes. Fine, thank you.
Okay, I think we're at an end. Paul, Jerry, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Chairman.
Could I just say, in terms of those 2 previous requests, I think, which were dated 24th of October last and 4th of December last, quite a long list of questions to the department, if you wouldn't mind, on our behalf.
Those are currently under consideration, and we will follow up, Chair, on that and try and expedite that as best we can.
And your priorities for 14-15, when will we have something to look at?
We were hoping to, I have to be very careful here, we were hoping to have a working draft before the end of March. I think the issue that we're facing is that we are altering the methodology for arriving at the 2014-15 priorities, in that we're aiming for better synchronisation with departments' internal planning processes through the balanced scorecard process. Because this is a change mechanism, I anticipate a delay on that, Chair.
Right.
But we would want the committee's input as soon as we can possibly get material to you in first draft form.
I take it from that this will be at the cost of synchronising the priorities with the start of the year the priorities refer to.
I am determined to work to ensure that we do not lose synchronisation with the start of the new financial year, Chair.
I wish you well.
But I am dependent on the goodwill of others.
I understand. Paul, Jerry, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, members.
Members, if I can crave your attention for a few more minutes, we're coming to the end. But on the basis of that the forward work programme is usually a nod, can I just say there is a little more detail to item 8 this week, in that there are a couple of inquiries that we're proposing. So on page 212 in your electronic pack, We have a proposal for an inquiry related to TBUC, Together Building a United Community. We're proposing we would put a focus on sectarianism and also on good relations, and specifically consider how communities and young people in particular could be included in the decision-making process. And as some of you be aware, we had some success with engaging young people who brought a report on interfaces and peace walls to an event we hosted in the Long Gallery, which they really appreciated, even though the division bell meant we had to absent ourselves for a while. So we have draft terms of reference for an inquiry into united communities as follows: to consider the manifestations of sectarianism and the approach of the executive in tackling sectarianism, consideration of how the good relations indicators feed into government policy. Secondly, to consider the role of young people and communities in shaping government policy in relation to the move from division to community integration. And thirdly, to consider best practice, both locally and internationally, in bringing divided communities together and in developing shared services. How do we feel?
Agreed. From my point of view.
Everybody content that we take this to the next phase?
Can I ask, is any thought been given around a time frame for this?
Well, I think because, the Peace Walls is basically a 10-year programme, Stephen, we're taking a long view on this.
Okay. That's fine.
And it would be something that we hope would genuinely be a positive assistance in the development of the policy, because this is the 10-year one, as you know. Yeah.
Thank you.
The other one then, members, is a shorter term issue. I reference page 216 of your pack, and it's in relation to the Barroso Task Force, which could be coming to an end this year. Draft terms of reference suggested would be fivefold. One, set out the original vision for the task force. Secondly, seek evidence from key stakeholders. 3, assess the outcomes from the task force. 4, identify lessons learned. And 5, consider the future of NI's engagement in EU affairs post-Barroso. And as Jerry Mulligan was saying, Barroso may go, the task force may not be renamed, but it may still be there. So I think as a shorter term piece of work, it might be useful. It would certainly be timely. Members content that we take the next stage? Okay, thank you very much. Page 219 then is the forward work programme. If anybody has a comment, if not, any other business?
Can we just term EU report the other?
Oh yes, sorry, on the mid-term EU report, are we content to forward to the other statutory committees for their consideration? Okay, in the absence of any other business, we meet again for Wednesday the 5th of February, 2 p.m, room 30. Thank you very much, members.